Hello, nerds! Nerds for Yang. I have a very special guest all the way from Hong Kong. I've got William on the show. Welcome to Nerds for Yang, William.
Hello, nerds. Good to see you.
That was very awesome. Hello, nerds. So, William, for those who are not familiar with you, why don't we just start with a little quick introduction to who you are, and then, of course, we're going to talk about what's going on in Hong Kong.
Well, I imagine that's all of you because I'm somebody very important. I'm basically a work-from-home dad who's been living in Hong Kong and thereabouts for the last 12 years. I really love it here. I think it's one of the coolest places to be and to visit. Now is a great time to visit. Everything is, hotels are extremely cheap these days. So come on by and I'll show you all around. I really do get out and about in Hong Kong quite a bit. I guess that's my one really special trait here is I treat the whole region of Hong Kong like a open world game. I have a map and I just will go to a spot and be like, Peter, that's my boy. I'll be like, let's go explore this. I'm sure there's something interesting here. And every time, no matter where we go, there's just something fascinating in Hong Kong. It's an amazing and exciting place.
You know, if someone had never been to Hong Kong and they're visiting for the first time, what would be like one or two things they should absolutely check out?
Things that you should absolutely check out. The view from the peak, you look it up, you'll know what I mean, is a thing to see. Going out for the hiking is something that someone might not think to do, but is absolutely amazing in Hong Kong. Hiking Lions Rock, for instance, is a great thing to do. Getting out to the wetland park in the west or Sai Kung in the east. These are things you might not otherwise do. The Big Buddha you're liable to hear about. It's just a big Buddha up in the mountains on Lantau Island near the airport. There's a Disneyland in Hong Kong, and if you have little kids and don't care for waiting in lines, it is the place to go. You'll spend more time getting to the front of the line than waiting in line. It's nice. It's
a small that sounds amazing.
It's really convenient.
Well, and William, you don't have a Hong Kong accent. You are originally from the States, I'm guessing.
Yes, I am originally from the States. I've lived in quite a few places. I lived in Pensacola, Florida, before coming to Hong Kong. There, I was a researcher at the Florida Institute for Human and Machine Cognition, where I worked on a project for the Defense Department called CALO, which I left because I didn't feel like it would ever amount to anything. That thing got renamed to Siri and ends up being what's on iPhones. So you never know what's what.
Oh, so the original research for Siri started in the Department of Defense?
Yeah, like basically everything else on the iPhone.
Yeah.
It was originally government funded.
Yeah. You know, that's so interesting because we always assume, or a lot of us assume that, wow, you know, like all great things come out of, Hewlett Packard or Xerox PARC or whatever. And, but like you mentioned, the internet was also a Department of Defense thing, wasn't it? Or
yes, it was.
Yeah. Well, so I guess the federal government has can get some things right every now and then, right?
Well, it makes sense for them to do basic research and then for somebody else to productize it. How you balance that is a good and interesting question that is sort of in front of us these days, especially with respect to, say, pharmaceutical research.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. Yeah, I guess there's always that issue of if it's a huge problem, no one private company, it may not make sense for them to make that investment and take on that risk. But
aviation is a good example where you had a bunch of firms that had patents for making parts of a plane, but no one could actually make a plane till they needed them for the war. And they're like, okay, now we need planes. So you guys work together and make it happen.
Yeah. So, and how did you end up in deciding to go to Hong Kong? It's not a common place for a software engineer to land.
My business partner at the time, he had lived in Taiwan
Hmm.
previously, and he was exploring living in mainland, but living in Hong Kong is much more convenient, and I could live or be anywhere. But I said, how about I come be and work with you? And so I came to Hong Kong and got acquainted with things here, experienced a huge dose of culture shock when I first arrived, and embraced it, and met my wife here, and got married, and have been loving it ever since.
Yeah. So it sounds like you'll stick around for a while, or are you planning on coming back in the near future, or what's the plan?
I can hardly plan more than 2 weeks in advance these days. Um, so I would love to stay in Hong Kong if they'll have me. But I'm not a permanent resident because I was here for a while and then I was away in other places for a while. You need to live in Hong Kong continuously for 7 years to become a permanent resident. So
Ah, okay. And is your wife a permanent resident? Is she?
she is not. She is from Taiwan originally, and
Okay.
she's an economics professor.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, we may have to get her on the show at some point.
So I follow her around, and I've been working and living online since online has been a thing.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing how with technology you can sort of have a much more distributed workforce than you could in the old days, right? And you could just almost be anywhere, and they wouldn't, as long as you're getting the work done for many companies, that's good enough.
Yeah, that's definitely how it's been with us sometimes, to a point of just being completely ridiculous. I remember one time I'm supposed to be vacationing in Bali, and then I need to uh, need to help out with a thing, and so I'm SSHing where the chickens, trying to keep the chickens from climbing on my keyboard, and every time I type a key, I wait a few seconds for it to find its way to the server and back again. It was a challenging trip.
Yeah. That would be a fun video conference with the chickens running around. Well, William, one of the things that has been curious to me, living in Europe as an American expat with Hong Kong sort of um, uh, familial ties, is this whole protest thing. And let me just share kind of the outsider's perspective, because most of my family hasn't been there since the 60s. And I know like a lot has changed since then.
It's been
Um,
a while.
yeah. But one of the things that I, just consuming kind of CNN and New York Times and whatever podcasts and stuff I listen to on general news is, well, there's these protests, there's these people storming the streets with umbrellas and making a big stink, originally over an extradition proposal, which was eventually pulled back by the government, and yet the protests persist. And what's not clear to me is like, who's in charge of the protests? What do they want? And like, how does this kind of play out? And I would love to get your kind of on the ground perspective as someone that's living there and probably sees more than we do from a few news snippets here and there.
Yeah, so being here has been really interesting this summer. I've kind of learned a lot and gotten acquainted with things that I did not know, even from having lived here for a long time, especially about people's attitudes and just how things are and how people understand things. Because you can't know what's going on with these protests unless you know like the background of how did we get here, what is going on, and how do people feel about things, because otherwise it just is not going to make any sense. um, Especially when you're like, well, who is in charge of this and what do they want? Let me try to sum it up
Yeah.
this way, because there's a long and short way to tell this story. Let me go with the short way. um, Hong Kong was a British colony for a while, and then it was handed over to mainland China's sort of overall authority in 1997, but it functioned and continues to function basically independently for most intents and purposes on a day-to-day basis. Chinese law doesn't apply in Hong Kong. Chinese, like, immigration is entirely separate. Currency is entirely separate. Government is entirely separate. And so Hong Kong's government involves a independent judiciary, a legislative council, and a chief executive that is sort of the successor to Britain's governor in Hong Kong. And so the chief executive, in the short of it, is that the chief executive is appointed rather than being elected. And so the idea was that there would be a process by which you would switch from having a appointed chief executive to an elected one. And the appointment process is a complicated electoral thing where people get like 1 vote and the Communist Party gets 2 votes, is what it amounts to, more or less. And so because of the fact that the executive branch is not an elected thing, people in Hong Kong have made their preferences known to the executive through the means of protest over and over again as time has gone by. So there being protests in Hong Kong is a really normal part of civic life here. Any given day, any given year, there'll be somebody having a tiny protest somewhere about something small. And every few years, something big happens where everybody, well, maybe not everybody, but thousands, tens of thousands, maybe 1 million people are out in the streets protesting. This is a population of about 8 million. So when 1 million people get out on the street, it's like, here are all the people who bothered to come out today, not just the sentiment. And so, so this summer, what happened is there was this extradition bill, and we don't need to get into the details of it, except that people found it really unpopular for what they felt were good reasons. And so 1 million people come out on the streets and they're like, this extradition bill is an evil law, you need to back off of this. And in the past, when that much force has come out on the streets to say this is a bad idea, the chief executive has said, my bad, we'll drop it. We won't do anything else with this bill. Okay, fine. But this year, it was different. This year, the chief executive's like, we're going to go ahead and pass the bill anyway. And so there was a protest on a Saturday. This was at the beginning of June. So then that Wednesday, when they were going to read, or the day before they were going to read the bill, there was another protest where people broke into the legislative council and some would say decorated, some would say vandalized it to some degree. Anyway, there was another protest in midweek, and they didn't end up reading the bill. And then there was a third protest the next week when 2 million people came out and were like, I don't think you understood the first time. We don't want this bill passed. And so from this part of the very beginning of the protest, 5 really clear demands emerged that the people were like, we want you to withdraw the bill. We don't want you to call the protesters rioters. We want you to let the arrested protesters go. We want you to investigate the police use of violence in pulling the protesters out of the legislative council thing. And we want that universal suffrage that we were promised in the basic law. And so then the chief executive of Hong Kong said basically to those 5 demands, no, 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 and hell no. And people were like, no, those weren't like recommendations. These are our demands. We're going to get this no matter what. And so all the protests in the 20 or so weeks since have been, at their root, is a way of people to keep saying, no, we're not okay with how things are. You got to respond to us. And the government's response has mostly been along the lines of, well, let's find out what the underlying problem here is. And the people's response is, there's no difficulty in finding out the underlying problem. We have 5 demands, not 1 less.
Yeah.
And they just chant this over and over again. And then the government would be like, well, we already talked about that. The answers are no, 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 and hell no. And the people are like, that's not good enough. No, we aren't going to deal with this. And so that has really been at the root of the back and forth. So eventually the bill was first, the chief executive promised to withdraw the bill when the legislative session started, and the session has started, and the bill has been withdrawn. And so that is withdrawn, but the people are like, yeah, but you didn't do it when we first complained, so we need to fix things. And since that time, there's been people in Hong Kong expect to be able to protest, and they do not expect the police to interrupt their protests. On the contrary, people's expectation is that the police will help accommodate protests and help direct traffic and make things easy for people. That is people's expectation for police behavior when these things happen. And the police has instead responded by ending protests early, tear gassing people. There have been thousands and thousands of canisters of tear gas released. They've responded by pepper spraying people. And I mean, you have to understand, Hong Kong is an extremely dense place. So if you shoot a canister of tear gas to disperse one protester, there are going to be 10 bystanders nearby and 100 people up in the buildings above you. And so there's just a expectation of how police would behave that people in Hong Kong have that they have not followed, that has made a lot of people extremely angry and frustrated with the government response. And they are frustrated because the government is using the police force to quash their protesting efforts rather than actually doing anything about the real demands that the people are making. The chief executive at one point was thinking to have dialogues with people in various districts of various districts of Hong Kong to talk about things and to explain to people, what her rationale for things is. And there is a sort of condescending tone that just makes people irate, where the chief executive's like, well, your father and I in Beijing, we talked about things and we've decided for you that you need to do this. And the people are like, yeah, we totally don't agree. Like, no, you don't get to just tell us what you want. And so the chief executive decided to have some dialogues, feeling and perhaps believing that in a dialogue where a few hundred people are randomly chosen to be able to participate and explain their feelings, that you'll find that there are many views and opinions that people have, and that there is a silent majority that is not being heard in this movement. What she got when she did this in Wan Chai instead was 150 people, lots of them wearing masks. We can get into masks in a minute. And of the 30 or so who were called upon to talk, about 3 of them were anxious about or opposed to the protests, and about 20 some of them would get up and say, 5 demands, not 1 less. Thank you, and sit down, or read some similar kind of statement. And so I think the government, people are used to the government in Hong Kong not necessarily particularly caring about people's interests. They're more interested in the business interests in Hong Kong and pleasing their masters in Beijing. So people are kind of used to that. But they tend to be pretty detached from everyone's opinion on the ground. And so they're just not used to it. I mean, even like when your president is elected, he has to at least appeal to, almost a majority of people, sort of, to get elected. But that's not a requirement for the government in Hong Kong. So they're just not good at this. They have no skill at relating to people and their issues. And so that just helps exacerbate the problem.
That is fascinating. It's interesting in that for some reason, the international coverage has positioned the protesters as very clearly very prominent and angry, but also there's this undertone of, but we don't know what they want. I'm curious, like those 5 demands, has that been clear? Like, do most people, are they aware of it? Like, I'm surprised, like the news coverage doesn't just talk about they want universal.
I can't speak to the news coverage, but
Yeah.
I can't imagine people being more clear about what they want. Like it's impossible for me to imagine people being more clear, especially with the 5 demands. They were extremely specific. Since then, things have gone on, and I'd say that currently the 2 demands are: we want universal suffrage, and we want the police investigated and revisited. Like the whole police force needs to be
retrained,
revamped in some way. Like there needs to be a reconciliation here, because people in Hong Kong used to really love and appreciate their police force. They thought that the police here are great, and there is no crime in Hong Kong that anyone can speak of seriously. I mean, like, Hong Kong is a gigantic, super dense city of 8 million people, and the crime you hear about is like the sort of thing you'd see in a small town. For there might be various reasons behind this, but that's what people are used to expecting. And so, like, one time I was going home, I'm with my 5-year-old, we're going home to take the bus, and we see there's a lot of yelling going on. We see some protesters, we see some police, we see some flashing lights, and he's on his scooter, because all small children in Hong Kong must have a scooter. And I grab him, I grab his scooter, and I nope right out of there, because that's what I know to do when there are police around. If you're not part of the solution, you're definitely part of the problem. So just be gone, like just get scarce. And because Hong Kong is a 3D sort of maze, I'm able to turn right, go into a building, and go up around and see what's going on from inside of a building. And what I saw just completely blew my mind, because a lot of people, so you have protesters yelling, you have police yelling, you have a lot of people just walking by this as though nothing is happening, when I know very well that tear gas could be released at any time. And then you've got people who are locals who are upset about this, especially the middle-aged ones. The middle-aged women who speak Mandarin are going to be the ones who are most angry. They are just yelling at the police saying, "Get out of here, we don't want you here, go away." And like, my head is exploding, and I'm like, all right, I just do not know how to parse this. And so there is a real expectation that the police are there to serve the people and not to stop protesters. And that's just where
how they do it there. Yeah.
Again, it's so you have to start from that perspective, because like, I'll see a video of something. My tolerance for police brutality is probably super low, but I've seen a few videos where people are like, "This is completely shocking," and I'm kind of like, well, if you want to detain someone, that's okay. You aren't being gratuitous in this instance. Now, sometimes I'm like, if once you've got somebody zip tied, if you keep hitting them, that's no good. But other times it's like, well, that's all right. And I guess another thing is, like, people don't have any guns here. There's not a lot that a person can do to 5 police officers who are coming at them. So you don't have to do all that much to detain a person if you want to. You don't need to be particularly punitive in doing it. And but lots of my friends, they see this and they're like, "This is completely unacceptable. I cannot believe this one bit." And so that just makes them super irate. Like the level of anger that this is met with is really significant. And so that's just that helps explain where people are coming from. For instance, with the subways, usually when there are big events or protests, there'll like be extra trains in the subway and extra service to make it run more smoothly. So when there is a protest and then they shut down the subway, like, people throw a freaking fit. Like, they just are like, "How am I supposed to get home? Why did you shut down the subway? How does this even work?" And or like the police stop a bus and search it. People are like, why are you stopping the bus? How am I supposed to get home if you're stopping the bus? What other arrangements have you made? Like that's the attitude is, how are you, like, you have no right to ruin my day.
Yeah, that's so fascinating on multiple levels. Like on the one hand, you would imagine the US is the place of individual freedom and liberty, and we would have the least tolerance for any kind of police brutality or excessive force, let's say. But it almost sounds like in Hong Kong, the protesters even have less tolerance for any kind of marginal excessive force by the police. They expect a different threshold, it sounds like.
Well, the US is a weird case in a way because, on the one hand, we are founded on the ideas of freedom and liberty and equality. And at the same time, the United States was also founded on the values of oppressing a significant percentage of its population. And I don't think we've solved that yet.
Mm-hmm.
And so the US is funny and strange in that respect. But one thing is that I found someone said that I felt was really insightful is he pointed out that most of the people in Hong Kong are either fled or are children or grandchildren of people who fled the Communist Revolution in 1949.
Mm-hmm.
And when they got to Hong Kong, they were like illegal immigrants. They had nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And they did not expect anything from the Hong Kong government except to be able to do their own thing and to be left alone and to speak their mind. And so anything that encroaches on that is going to be something that people respond to. And people in Hong Kong are they have a certain civility to them, and they get along with each other. But part of that civility is I get to do whatever I want. Like it's like in a way, it's like a libertarian paradise. Everyone can do what they want, and you get buses that run every minute. And so it's, and so there is a bit of attitude here that is really important to understand. And so the like in mainland, there's a sense that the social contract is, we'll take care of you and don't criticize and behave yourself and don't criticize the party. Mm-hmm. And so if we aren't taking care of you, then do let us know. And you do get places from time to time in mainland, you'll get uprisings where people are like, yeah, something is not going right in my city. And if it gets big enough, the central government, goes to the mayor or whatever level they need to and says, so what's the deal? Your people are not happy. What can we do to fix this? And that's sort of how the party, in a way, maintains its legitimacy, is through taking care of people. I don't think Hong Kong people have that same expectation for their government to do squat for them.
Yeah.
I mean, lots of my friends are like, yeah, they don't care about us. They care about the tycoons. They don't care about what individual people want. They just want to keep us from yelling too much.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's fascinating how it almost seems like there's like a shadow referendum when they go out and protest, because it sounds like they don't feel like they have appropriate representation in the legislative council, and so the way to vote.
Yeah, so the legislative council is a good example because it has like 70 members or so. Half of them are elected by business interests, like straight up. Yeah, it's like you get to be the representative of shipping, and you get to be the representative from telecom, and you get to be the representative of, accountants. Yeah. So it's like right there. And I think this is part of what's making people sufficiently upset now is there was a legislative council election fairly recently, a few years ago, in which six of the people who were popularly elected were disqualified for taking their oath of office in in a sarcastic sort of way. And this had been done previously without like people had done these sorts of protest swearing-ins previously without facing repercussions, but 6 people doing it was too much, and so these 6 people, after being elected, were disqualified from holding office. And so the fact, I think part of the reason why things have gotten intense here is the possible release valves or valid paths to representation that people might feel like they have been turned off to some degree, and so then they're flipping out.
So how does this play out, William? Like, what do you think is going to happen? It seems like they're at an impasse.
So yeah, they're definitely at an impasse. So what's going to happen? There are district council elections in a few weeks' time. District council members, there's like 500 of them or so. I think it might be less than that. They're like people who they're like city councils for the different parts of Hong Kong, just managing things that are going on in their districts, parks, and that sort of thing. But since it is the one election coming up, it's a chance for people to have a referendum on the government to some degree. And so what is interesting with that is that all of these seats are currently like being contested, and so yeah, that's an opportunity for people to try to express themselves. And I do know that one very popular figure who actually came to the U.S. and was talking about the I think it is the Human Rights and Decency Act. Let's see, Human Rights, the Hong Kong something. There was the Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act. There we go. He was talking to U.S. Senate about this. He just got disqualified like a few hours ago from standing for the district council, because whoever decides if you're patriotic enough to be on the district council said you're not patriotic enough, you don't get to run. So I am sure there will be protests tonight because of his disqualification.
So there'll be those local elections. Sounds like some of the people, and did you say that at one point there were 2 million that went out and protested?
Yeah, it was like everybody.
Wow, that would be like 75 million Americans on a day going out and protesting the government. That would be just nuts.
Yeah, it was huge.
Yeah,
but like just more people than you can possibly imagine in one place. It was a very big deal, and so that is the next thing that's coming up, are these elections in November. The Financial Times had a report the other day saying that the chief executive, Beijing may remove her in March for doing a bad job, which seems like the sort of thing that Beijing would do. It's like, you can't keep your people in order, you're out. That just seems like... do
you think she'll be replaced with someone who's more amenable to compromise, or actually like a stronger arm, harder, firmer kind of grasp?
I don't know. I really, I don't. Yeah, I don't know. Like the nature of mainland politics has changed since Xi Jinping's rise, and so it's been in transition, and I don't know where that ends up.
Yeah, I mean, you could imagine if you're in Beijing running this massive country, and there's this little island where they protest all the time, and 1 out of 4, it's not a big, well, like 1 out of 4 will go out in the streets and like challenge you. You could imagine they're probably pretty worried that they don't want that to be a pattern to be embraced by the mainland, right? I mean, that would just be terrible for the Chinese Communist Party to maintain power. in that environment, right?
So I think they are definitely worried about that. They've certainly made out the protests to be the protests and the protesters to be, you know, crazy, violent, evil people,
Treasonous,
as
yeah.
much as possible,
Hmm.
um, and have, you know, have strongly pushed that notion. And my mainland friends who know anything about this, it's like it's kind of like being colorblind, I guess, in this following sense. Hong Kongers see the writing on the wall and are completely freaked out by it. And mainlanders look at this and they're like, I just see a bunch of blue dots. What are you talking about? And the Hong
Mm.
Kongers are like, but wait a second. And they just are stammering. And the mainlanders are like, so are you saying that I understand that rent is too high in Hong Kong. Is that the problem? And Hong Kongers are like, no, it's not the rent, it's freedom and liberty. And the mainlanders are like, what are you talking about? And then the Hong Kongers finally, you know, gotten steely, and he's like, give me liberty or give me death. And they're like, what are you talking about? That sounds like, has the NSA brainwashed you?
Right.
What are you talking about? That sounds really weird. And so that's kind of the attitude that I've seen. Of course, anyone in mainland who has a pro democracy attitude about Hong Kong isn't going to be able to express it. Not online, not anywhere except their home. I mean, so there's no chance to like if you want things to run smoothly, you can make it so that everyone sort of is happy with the way things are, or you can shut down anyone who isn't happy with the way things are. And I feel that in mainland, both of these are considered good ways to solve the problem of a harmonious society. So let's take care of people, and anyone who can't be happy by just being by just having their physical needs taken care of, will just stop them from raising problems. And so that's I think that's kind of how things work out there. A lot of times.
It's fascinating, and I mean, it sounds like we could unpack this for quite a while. But I also want to hit American sort of politics. I'm guessing, do you still stay kind of on top of what's going on stateside, and what's your view from your vantage point on American politics?
Well, I have sort of the Hong Kong specific thing. There is the so-called Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act, which
Mm-hmm.
just passed the House unanimously. Basically,
Wow.
it was just a oral vote, like all in favor, yay, any
Mm.
opposed,
Silence.
crickets. All right, that passes, and it will, in all likelihood, pass the Senate similarly. Which what it does is it makes it so that people who participate in the protests here and are punished, arrested, serve, or arrested, or end up being convicted of some crime or another, would not that wouldn't count against them if they were trying to get a visa to visit the U.S. Another thing that it would do that I think some of the protesters are most happy about is it would make it so that leaders in Hong Kong that the U.S. deems to have violated human rights could have their assets frozen in the U.S. and not be allowed to come to the U.S. And Hong Kong people feel like they can't really hold their leaders to account. So feeling like that the U.S. can hold their leaders to account kind of makes them happier. And then the other thing that might be a more bargaining chip in the broader China negotiation over trade and such would be that, according to this act, every year the State Department would reevaluate whether Hong Kong deserves its special trading status with the United States, and so then that could be the threat to remove that special trading status could be used as a bargaining chip. Of course, if the U.S. actually went through with that, Beijing could reply with, okay, we don't need Hong Kong anymore. Well, screw that. We'll just let them languish for forever. So, I mean, that certainly seems like a good possibility for how Beijing will treat things, is be like, okay, well, Hong Kong's a lost cause. We'll just let it be sad example of how one country, two systems can't possibly work. We should have one country and one system. Otherwise, prosperity will not happen. And so, more broadly, I think the soft power thing that the U.S. could do is get its house in order and show that democracy can actually deliver good results to people. Because there is kind of a question about whether this is working at all these days. And you have that in the U.S. You have that with the U.K. and Brexit. Like, how do we all deal with each other and make for a good society together? And if democracies can come together and say, well, it takes a bit of debate, but eventually we can figure it out and pull together and make for a free and pleasant place to live, then that is a compelling argument against authoritarianism. And it is like I was having a conversation with a friend recently, and who thinks well of the United States and so forth, and we were talking about things. And when we got talking, this is a mainland friend,
Mm-hmm.
he did not realize that people in the US do not have universal health care. He's like, wait, what? You go to a hospital and you have to do what? And you have to have insurance and you pay out of pocket for things? That's completely nuts. And I'm like, yeah, well, this is not a thing that we do. And he's like, how is that civilized in the least bit? And I'm like, well, there's a history behind this, and we could talk about it. But so in some sense, I think people still have a rosy picture of the U.S. that may or may not be founded. And I mean, if you look at the U.S., everyone lives in a mansion, so it seems, compared to here. Everyone has a yard, and it has the appearance of niceness, but there are structural problems to the U.S. that cause a lot of people to hurt. A funny example: I was in Shenzhen, that's the mainland city just north of Hong Kong, talking to a real character there, and we got talking about the opioid crisis, and he's like, well, this is just payback for the opium war. Now it's our turn to screw you over. And he's like, we don't even need to invade. He definitely had his views. These do not represent the views of hardly anyone in China, trust me. But he's like, we don't even need to invade the US. They'll take all their guns and shoot each other. And I'm just like, oh my gosh.
It is ironic that you are living in a place that used to be under British colonial control as a result of Western powers insisting on selling opioids into China. And now we in the US are struggling with one of the largest epidemics ever. It's just crazy how history kind of flipped around.
Yeah, with opioids manufactured in China.
Yeah, it's just weird. But what are your thoughts on one of the things that has been curious to me is President Trump has often talked about how previously, in his view, America was not respected and was laughed at and not taken seriously before he was elected. And now the rest of the world respects the United States more. And I can say, living and currently working in Europe, I'm not observing that phenomenon. It's quite the reverse. But I was curious, what's the vantage point from Hong Kong? Because this is kind of cool in that we're also obviously in the middle of a trade war with China. What is the Hong Kong's kind of perspective on America's standing in the world and this whole kind of bilateral tension with China?
I'd say a lot of Hong Kong people are more worried about Hong Kong itself. Then sort of there are other people who are, yes, definitely worried about economy and trade, and that's what they're interested in doing stuff about usually. And at that level, it's just like Trump is a random roll of the dice every day. I feel there's a lot of just ignore Trump and figure out what the State Department's actually doing, because he doesn't seem to be in charge. I mean, he says random crap, but no one thinks because he'll just change his mind. It doesn't. He has the attention span of a fish. No one cares what he has to say. Like.
And what's your personal view? Like, are you following the Democratic primary? Are you backing anyone? Are you considering anyone? How are you evaluating the race currently?
Well, sort of. I'm the kind of person who doesn't commit to a particular perspective. Like if I have to make a choice, I'll make the choice when I have to make a choice. When I vote in the Democrats abroad primary, whenever it ends up being, but it will be after some elections. And there's been such a big field. It is useful to see that pan out before making a decision. I can tell you. So what can I say with complete firmness? I do not think Biden is a good choice for the Democrats. I feel that part of what got Trump elected was Hillary saying America is already great, and a lot of Americans being like BS. I can't even begin to believe that. So I'll take the wild card versus that nonsense.
Right.
And so I feel that Biden would just be Democrats shooting themselves in the foot yet again when it comes to having a clue about what people are caring about. So that one I can say strongly. With Sanders, I have to say the leftists, like the leftists in the U.S., they have a lot of heart. I don't necessarily agree with them on particular policy ideas, but they actually care about people, and that's nice to hear, because I feel like Republicans used to, but have gotten away from that and have been, since Newt Gingrich time, too focused on winning and have sort of undermined conservative principles. And so I have a lot of never Trump friends who are just like, where did my party go? I don't know what to do now. Like I can't, there's nothing for me in this political landscape. I'm a conservative person, and yes, I could vote for Trump, but although he would enact conservative policies and elect perhaps judges that select judges that I would approve of, all of his techniques are anything but conservative, and so they're
wouldn't be comfortable with a Warren. Probably that would not be comforting for them.
Yeah, I don't know how much. So Warren is someone who I have followed since she started really getting into politics, and so I've liked everything about Warren as long as I have known her. I feel she is a sensible person who listens and looks at what's going on and just can pay attention and figure things out in a way that few people can. When she wrote about Hong Kong affairs recently, and I would have to find the link where she did this, but she wrote about the situation in Hong Kong and about the Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act, and I'm like, there are so many Hong Kongers who would want a president of the United States to say exactly what she just said. She did her homework as far as what would be appealing to a swath of Hong Kongers. Like whoever she talked to knows it's completely wired into this. And I found that very impressive. I
guess my point, William, was that your friends who are kind of traditional Republicans, like pre-Palin kind of Republicans, they might feel like if it were between Warren and Trump, I wonder if they would feel like citizens without a state. Like I don't know if they would if they feel comfortable with either candidate.
I don't know. I haven't heard them talking about Warren one way or the other, and that's probably a good sign in a sense, because if they were opposed to Warren, they probably would be talking about her and being like, "Oh gosh, I really hope she doesn't get this," because that would just be terrible. And I haven't heard that, so maybe they would be more open to the possibility. I don't know. Like Trump he just seems unwell in in my estimation. Like,
Yeah, no,
as,
I agree with you there.
I mean, he was always like he has a nose for a sort of um, catching the spotlight and appealing to his so-called base, and riling them up and getting them excited. And so this leaves Republicans in a hard place. I feel like, I mean, the fundamental problem here is for these big elections with dozens of candidates, having a first past the post, vote for your favorite person, um, can give you a candidate that you really don't like in the end. Because if you got all the Republicans here and Trump
Mhm.
over here, then even if most people are over here, the vote got split 5 ways, and so Trump gets to be the candidate. And so it just, I don't feel that the primary mechanisms we use scale to lots of candidates, and so then you get whoever is the weirdest being chosen.
So what's your take on, let's say, Buttigieg, Harris, and of course we have to talk about Andrew Yang. What's your take on the rest of
Um,
the field?
so I really like how Yang has brought a basic income to the forefront. I know lots of people who like the idea of a basic income, and the thing that is interesting to me is the reason why they like this notion better than others is because it would be something dependable in an otherwise really uncertain life. So so if you're a person who's making ends meet and has hustle, you are employed most months, and you're making do. But if things come up short, there's not a lot of recourse you have, and there's not a lot that you can rely on. And you're like, I'm not unemployed. I'm just trying to make ends meet. I don't need a handout. I don't want to sign up for a thing. It's just this 1 month that
Mhm.
is rough for me. And so certainly anyone who I've a big chunk of my friends who are like having something that was just certain. So for instance, you could take a basic income and you could take a negative income tax that could be structurally identical. Like on average, you end up paying exactly the same, but the basic income has more certainty to it, and that would be a better policy choice, I think. And I also feel that you give people money and they'll use it. Most people are going to use it for whatever is going to be most efficient in their life. And so, for instance, things like tax credits for buying a home, things like uh, student
Mhm.
student loans or student loan forgiveness. These create perverse incentives where either people buy houses when perhaps that wouldn't be the right choice for them without the incentive to do so, or people pursue a degree that might not have actually been the best choice for them, but you've pushed the weight on, well, getting a degree is a better thing, and maybe that's the best way to get a certification, and maybe it's not. And so I feel you give people money directly and they'll be able to figure out what they need to spend it on.
So it sounds like you are keeping Yang on the table in terms of
I
your support.
I would love if Yang were a more serious contender.
Mm-hmm.
I hope that his candidacy helps sort of shift the needle. I like how he's been very eager to engage with people. With a background in like AI myself, I have a feel for technological change and how it is very slow for a long time and then suddenly quick, and everyone's doing a different thing. And I feel that the rate of technological change is way past the rate by which people can adjust to it easily at this point. And so something to help us smooth things out and figure things out is a good approach to have. So I really like that about Yang.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that universal basic income was a meaningful topic in the last debate is a great sign that he's sort of raising kind of awareness of a lot of these issues. And we'll have to see. I mean, as you may know, he did raise 10 million last quarter versus 2.8 million the previous quarter. He's qualified for the next round of debates. So I think a lot of people feel the way you do, which is if you want to make sure that he's a credible candidate. Like you don't have, it sounds like you don't have any big issues with his policies. In fact, you support many of them, but you want to make sure that he can go the distance before you kind of throw your full support behind him. Is that a fair characterization, or how would you summarize your view on Yang?
I don't feel like I'm obligated to throw. I'm just one dude. I don't need to support anybody, right? It's not. My endorsement doesn't matter to anyone. And I don't know what would be best, but I'm glad to have these conversations come up. One of the things that you mentioned, William, about Warren reminds me that the two of them actually had a little bit of a disagreement around the impact of automation on the American labor force, and basically, I think Warren was of the mind that, hey, the reason why the American worker is struggling is mainly due to bad trade deals that are favoring multinational corporations. And I think Yang's position was, no, actually automation has been more disruptive. Do you have a view, given that you work in AI and tech? So here's a view that I can stand behind. Let's think back to the dot-com bubble, where in the 90s we're going to do everything online and it's just going to be everywhere, and we'll be ordering our dog food online. So, and it turned out that this bubble burst, and that totally did not happen, except now it is. And so now people do order their dog food online, or their sofa. This podcast brought to you by. So timing can make a difference with respect to some of these things. And so I'm not the right person to say, well, if we had this kind of trade deal with these kinds of people right now, what would its effect be on the labor force in the US? I'm not a person who knows the answer to that question. Long term, we can definitely see, one thing that we can see is firms pivoting away from China, from their manufacturing in as much as they can, to other places that are cheaper and less fraught. And China definitely wanting to nationalize a lot of its, it's like, we've learned the skills, now we're just going to do it ourselves. Thanks, goodbye. We're going to stand proud now. And so I feel there are, I feel that there are billions of people left who could really benefit from trade liberalization. So what does that mean for Americans back home? I feel we do have structural problems that support business at the expense of people, and this is something that we really should address. But how to do this is not something that I can answer. I mean, we're so down. Like, this would be a great thing to have a serious debate about, but we're back at the level of basic truth of like how many people showed up to an event, an inauguration, if you will. Like what is the answer to that question? Are some of our problems facing us? Like are people suffering or not, and in which way? Like just figuring this out seems to be a difficult political challenge these days. One thing that I feel Warren said that I felt was spot on was people were talking about plastic straw bans, and that was a thing. And yes, a plastic straw is a very intimate thing that you put in your mouth, but there's not a lot of plastic in a plastic straw. So we really have to ask, well, what are our real sources of, say, pollution or problems in financial systems in the environment with these things, and let's actually find out what real answers are to things, and not answers that we've already pre-decided on because they match a political narrative that makes sense to either ourselves genuinely or our constituents that you feel like, oh well, they'll eat this up. So yeah, like any candidate that stands for truth and sensibility and figuring shit out, I'd be happy for.
Yeah, it's all relative, right?
Like, just listen to what people's actual problem is and address that rather than ignoring them. I mean, this is what Hong Kong's main problem is. You have elites that pay no attention to people, or if they do, they're like, oh, why don't we just give you a discount that this kind of happened? You people seem to be upset. Why don't we give you a discount on your power bills for the next few months? And people are like, it's not about the power bill. It's about, freedom and representation and feeling like I'm heard. So I feel any candidate who can listen and pay attention is one that I would willingly support.
Well, it sounds like you would be open to the revolution of reason and the return of rational thinking. So we can agree on that for sure, William. I do want to thank you so much for sharing the kind of color and context of what's going on in Hong Kong. We really don't get that level of nuance in the coverage, international media coverage. And I guess for political reasons and kind of geopolitical reasons, I don't think other countries are really anxious to get to kind of have a stated opinion on this stuff, because obviously China is an important trade partner one way or another. So it's great to kind of get your on the ground perspective. And I just want to thank you again for coming on the show.
You're very welcome.
And William, are you active on social media? If people are interested in following your thoughts, is that something that you do, or do you focus mostly on family and more important things?
I don't have important thoughts on social media. I am one who is happy to sort of like and subscribe and find out what people are saying. But with social media, there's a good choice to think, do I really need to dive into this conversation, or can I just sit back and listen to what people are caring about and what they have to say? And for the most part, I like to sit back. So yeah, I'm on Twitter, but I don't tweet. My name is William Taysom. Anyone can find me because I'm like the only one.
I interrupted you, William. What was your handle?
William Taysom.
Okay.
If anyone who Googles William Taysom will find me. They might find a talk or two that I did about, philosophy nonsense and computers, and that's what I do in my spare time when I'm not anxious about whether my city that I live in is going to fall to pieces.
Well, given those topics, you might get a few nerds for Yang that check out your talks, and for sure we will keep our fingers crossed that things reach a positive outcome in Hong Kong, and hopefully we will discuss again in the future as the race continues, and maybe you're ready to back a horse. Oh, go ahead, William. You had another point?
Anyone coming to visit Hong Kong, it's a great time to visit. Talk to me. I will show you all the things. It's a great place to come, and hotels are cheap.
Yeah, when I publish this, if it's okay, you sent me a picture of this beautiful kind of nature kind of landscape that maybe some people don't think of when they hear Hong Kong. They think of the skyscrapers and stuff like that. So I'll share that in this video as a cutover.
Well, that's the thing. Like 3/4 of Hong Kong is mountain and sea, which makes the other 1/4 like the craziest, most amazing city you have ever seen in your whole life. Here's a 60-story skyscraper. Here's a 60-story skyscraper. Here's 50 of them right in a row. It's completely nuts.
Yeah. It's quite improbable how so much economic development and just sort of construction in such a small, tiny little island. It's a little bit like, I mean, obviously it's not the same, but it's a little bit like Vegas. Like, how did that happen? Like in the middle of the desert, they built this huge city, and Hong Kong has sort of stuck out for so many decades as a really extraordinary place and continues to capture our attention. So thank you so much, William. We really appreciate you having on the show, and hopefully we'll see you again soon.
Hopefully. Take
All
care.
right. Take care, William.